3 IDF divisions did not fall in battle. They ran out of fuel, and when the last tank went cold and the last artillery piece went silent, the soldiers inside those formations did not die fighting. They surrendered in 72 hours. And that is the story that every mainstream outlet is either getting wrong or refusing to tell you completely. What happened at Ashdod in the early hours of this morning was not simply a missile strike against a port facility. It was the surgical removal of the central nervous system of Israel's entire military sustainment architecture. And the reason it worked, the reason 500 hypersonic weapons in 50 minutes produced a strategic outcome that years of conventional warfare had failed to produce, is a lesson sitting in military doctrine since Napoleon, since Rommel, since every campaign in history where the side that ran out of supplies ran out of options. The IDF did not lose 3 divisions to Iranian missiles. It lost them to a targeting philosophy so precise, so strategically disciplined, that the outcome was mathematically determined from the moment the first Fattah-2 left its launch rail. Stay with me through this, because what happened in the last 72 hours does not just change this conflict. It changes the calculus of every military confrontation on Earth, and every government from Washington to Beijing to Moscow is updating its strategic assumptions right now based on what Iran just proved is possible. By the time this strike was executed, Iran's operational planners had already demonstrated through the Haifa strikes that they could reach and destroy hardened military infrastructure across the full depth of Israeli territory. Israeli command knew this. They had already begun dispersing critical assets, hardening remaining command nodes, establishing alternative operating procedures for a military whose primary fixed bases had been severely degraded. These were competent professional adaptations to a genuinely difficult situation, and they were completely, entirely irrelevant, because Iran's planners had already moved past the question of how to destroy military installations. They had identified something more fundamental, something that cannot be dispersed, cannot be hardened, and cannot be replicated once it is gone. The supply chain itself. You can scatter your forces across 100 locations. You cannot scatter the port through which their sustenance arrives. After the destruction of Haifa, Ashdod had become not just a port, but the singular logistics lifeline of the entire Israeli military operation. Approximately 70% of all remaining military cargo imports were flowing through that terminal. The port was running at 140% of its designed throughput capacity, operating around the clock, prioritizing military cargo over everything else. And that overloading, that desperation-driven concentration of military logistics material into a confined geographic footprint did not go unnoticed. When you force your entire logistics architecture through a single point, you have not just created a vulnerability, you have created an invitation. The strike was executed in 3 sequenced waves, each targeting a different layer of the logistics infrastructure. The first wave of 180 Fattah-2 missiles arrived simultaneously and immediately went to work on the container handling infrastructure and the military cargo staging areas. Within 12 minutes, every heavy lift crane processing military equipment had been destroyed. The military cargo staging area, containing thousands of containers of weapons, ammunition, and spare parts awaiting inland distribution, absorbed strikes that initiated fires hot enough to detonate the ammunition within the containers themselves. Secondary explosions extended the destruction far beyond the initial impact footprint. The second wave, 210 weapons arriving 22 minutes after the first, went after the fuel import infrastructure. The southern terminal handling Israel's petroleum product imports was struck in a sequencing pattern, ensuring comprehensive destruction through cascading fire propagation. The same methodology developed against Haifa's fuel terminal, applied with the precision that only operational experience produces. By the time the second wave had completed its engagement, the entire southern terminal was engulfed in fire that would burn for more than 20 hours. The third wave, 110 weapons held deliberately in reserve, targeted not the port itself, but the transportation infrastructure connecting it to the inland distribution network. Highway interchanges routing cargo toward Jerusalem and Tel Aviv were struck at their most critical choke points. The rail terminus handling heavy military equipment was destroyed. The bridge infrastructure over the Lachish River carrying the primary southern supply route was struck at multiple points. Iran did not just destroy a port in this strike. It systematically severed every logistics artery feeding from that port into the military distribution network in 50 minutes. The damage assessment produced numbers that Israeli Logistics Command had no framework for managing. Military cargo destroyed in the staging area represented approximately 18 days of ammunition consumption for the 3 deployed divisions. The fuel terminal destruction eliminated the primary resupply pathway for ground vehicle fuel, leaving those divisions on their organic carried reserves. 4 to 7 days, no functioning port through which resupply could arrive, no intact road network through which overland resupply could flow at the required scale. The arithmetic was immediate and unambiguous. Fuel exhaustion would end meaningful operations long before the ammunition ran out. The divisions were not defeated. They were stranded. And within 72 hours, 3 IDF frontline formations formally ceased offensive operations and entered into localized surrender negotiations. 3 divisions, frontline formations equipped with Merkava IV main battle tanks and some of the most capable infantry in the region. They did not lay down their weapons because they were defeated in battle. They laid down their weapons because the supply chain that sustains modern armored warfare had been severed above them, and no one was coming to fix it. The employment of 500 Fattah-2 missiles in a single strike represents the largest single hypersonic weapon salvo ever recorded in the history of warfare. It represents the operational proof that Iran has achieved hypersonic missile production at a scale that transforms this technology from a demonstration capability into a genuine strategic instrument, one deployable in numbers sufficient to overwhelm any defensive architecture currently fielded anywhere in the world. The Fattah-2's combination of terminal velocity, maneuvering unpredictability, and GPS-independent guidance architecture produces an intercept problem that the Arrow, Patriot, and Iron Dome systems were not designed to solve against a coordinated salvo of this scale. American electronic warfare assets attempted GPS denial operations over the Ashdod target area throughout the engagement window, the same countermeasure that failed against earlier Iranian strike packages. The Fattah-2's terrain-referenced inertial navigation combined with optical terminal guidance produced impact accuracies that GPS denial cannot degrade because GPS plays no role in the terminal guidance architecture. This was anticipated by Iranian weapons designers. It was engineered around, and the engineering worked. What the Ashdod strike demonstrates that previous engagements did not is the production depth behind the program. Employing 500 missiles in a single operation while maintaining reserves for follow-on strikes implies a production inventory exceeding 1,000 operational rounds. Building that inventory under comprehensive international sanctions, using entirely domestically sourced components, through a program that Western intelligence had not fully assessed as having achieved this output level, represents one of the most significant intelligence failures in recent American analytical history. The assumption that economic pressure would limit Iranian precision weapons production to quantities insufficient for large-scale operational employment has been definitively refuted, not theoretically, operationally, against a real target, with real consequences. The production economics carry the same strategic logic that characterizes Iran's entire approach. The Arrow 3 interceptor carries a unit cost exceeding $2 million per round, with doctrine calling for multiple interceptors per target. Against a 500-missile salvo, the theoretical defensive expenditure required to achieve meaningful intercept rates approaches $3 billion in a single engagement. Iran's entire strike package cost a fraction of that figure to produce. The economic asymmetry is not incidental. It is the strategic foundation of the operational concept. From everything I understand about how Washington operates in genuine strategic crisis, the hours following Ashdod strike confirmation were among the most difficult this administration has faced. Not because the options were unclear, but because every military option carried costs exceeding what the political environment could absorb, and every diplomatic option required concessions that decades of policy had made impossible to offer openly. Direct American airstrikes against Iranian missile infrastructure runs into the Hormuz problem. Iranian doctrine for responding to direct American military action includes the Strait of Hormuz closure option, a step that would remove approximately 20% of global oil supply from the market and produce an energy shock whose consequences would dwarf any military benefit achieved by the strikes. Emergency resupply runs into physical reality. You cannot resupply 3 divisions through a port that no longer exists. American airlift cannot approach the throughput capacity that maritime logistics through Ashdod provided. The arithmetic does not work. Moving carrier groups closer runs into the same anti-ship missile threat environment that has already forced multiple repositioning decisions. No American commander wants to test carrier air defense against a coordinated anti-ship ballistic missile saturation strike with irreplaceable assets and thousands of American lives at stake. What Washington is left with is the diplomatic track. And the diplomatic track requires offering Iran something in exchange for halting military operations that are currently succeeding. What Iran requires: meaningful sanctions relief, recognition of its regional security interests, adjustment of American military posture in the theater, are concessions that American Middle East policy has been specifically structured to prevent for decades. The silence from Washington since the Ashdod strike is not the silence of an institution that has not yet decided what to do. It is the silence of an institution that has recognized that all available options are bad, and that the least bad option requires acknowledging things about the limits of American power that the current political environment makes extremely difficult to state publicly. The psychological weight of 3 IDF divisions surrendering carries strategic significance that equals the military significance. The IDF has maintained across its entire existence a narrative of capability and resilience that has served as a strategic asset independent of its literal truth. That narrative has deterred adversaries and sustained domestic morale through genuinely difficult periods. The surrender of 3 frontline formations in 72 hours, under conditions that honest analysis will attribute to strategic failure in protecting sustainment infrastructure rather than to tactical defeat, has fractured that narrative in a way that no public affairs operation can repair. For Russia, the strategic returns on the Iranian relationship have been validated so thoroughly that the investment logic is beyond internal question. The technology cooperation, the production support, all of it has produced operational outcomes that directly advance Russian strategic interests by demonstrating to every government watching that the American security guarantee operates under constraints that limit its availability precisely when it is most needed. For China, the Taiwan calculation has shifted in ways American strategic planners will spend years fully absorbing. The demonstration that precision weapons employed by a determined regional actor can produce division-level surrenders without direct great power involvement provides a template whose implications for cross-strait contingency planning are significant. The operational logic of Haifa and Ashdod will be studied in Beijing with analytical attention that should concern Washington deeply. 50 minutes of hypersonic fire, 1 port destroyed, 3 divisions stranded, 72 hours to surrender. This is what the mathematics of modern logistics warfare looks like when executed by a military institution that identified the decisive node, developed the weapon to destroy it, and struck with the precision and scale that left no margin for recovery. The conflict is not over, but the question of where operational leverage sits is no longer a matter of serious analytical debate. Iran does not need to destroy the IDF entirely to achieve its strategic objectives. It needs only to sustain enough pressure to make continued resistance more costly than a negotiated outcome addressing its core security interests. 2 destroyed ports, 3 surrendered divisions, and a Washington that has publicly run out of clean options suggest that calculation is being made right now in every capital that matters.